Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1140 just came out. This was such a fun chapter, both in terms of Luffy and Zoro's interactions with Gaban, and the setup that we got with the Gods Knights at the end, and the introduction of the new members. I want to kick off with a prediction regarding why Shamrock is being called back to Marijua, because it's not something that I see many people talking about. So we've all noticed that Shamrock's title at this moment is not the same as what his father, Figarland Garling's was. Figarland Garling had a title that was something like Supreme Commander or something of the Gods Knights, whereas Shamrock was introduced as just a captain. However, I believe that's because Shamrock has not yet gotten his official promotion. From our perspective, Garling was promoted to the Gorosei like months and months ago, like that happened so many chapters back, at least from the reader's perspective. You have to remember that in story, Garling was literally just promoted. That scene of him being promoted from leader of the Gods Knights to the new Gorosei just happened in story time. So especially considering that Shamrock was likely out doing missions like this, potentially even trying to recruit more Gods Knights members, it's very likely that he has not yet actually been called back to Marijua yet to get news of his promotion to naturally fill the shoes of his father and become the new Supreme Commander of the Gods Knights. I think some of the dialogue between Shamrock and the new Gods Knights that showed up also seems to imply that Shamrock has not been back at Marijua in a minute. So I think that's the transition that we're seeing here. We just saw that, Garling, the previous commander of the Gods Knights, was promoted to the Gorosei, and I think likely what we're about to see next is Shamrock being called in to now being promoted from captain of the Gods Knights to his father's previous position, which is the new commander of the Gods Knights. So we're just getting these two promotions back to back and kind of filling things out. I do really hope that we get to see some glimpse of Shamrock actually fighting before he's sent back to Marijua. I hope that, he gets to partake a little bit in this game that he's implying that he wants to set up, just because he's too interesting of a character with too much potential to just leave us with his introduction. We have yet to even really get that much of his personality or anything like that, so I feel like Oda should give readers at least a little bit of a tease of what to expect with this character, and why we should be excited for him outside of just being, Shanks' brother. So that's my hopes for him. But first, it's the month of love, and we have the most romantic islands in One Piece available for you this February. This month, you can visit the Island of Women, or maybe Kamabaka Kingdom is more your speed, or the Nation of Romance Dressrosa, or the Island of Gorgeous Sakura Petals Drum Kingdom. Each poster is printed on matte paper, hand-cut by the artist himself, and you can get all four together for 50% off each poster. You can also still get the premium package if you want to appear on my streams, and in that case, you can also choose any poster from 2024 as well. So if you want Dressrosa, Amazon Lily, Drum Kingdom, and Kamabaka Kingdom for your walls, just hit the link in the description below. All posters from 2024 will also be available in the complete original set bundle. As for the other Gods Knights, St. Somers and St. Kiringham, I think we can imagine that these are at least two of the stronger Gods Knights out there, especially because Shamrock is being sent back home, so if you really want two powerhouses to corral the Giants of Elbaf, the supposed strongest nation, then you would need to send two of the strongest Gods Knights in Shamrock's place. The feeling I got from their introductions is that St. Somers is more likely to be the stronger one. He seems to be being given a little bit more presence and a little bit more dialogue. Although, interestingly, Kiringham does seem to have a mythical Zoan, which seems to be the Kirin, which is a mythological creature from the east. I will say I don't know that much about the Kirin, but I do know that it's fairly important in, I believe, Chinese mythology, so I would not underestimate this dude, despite his more anxiety-ridden introduction. But St. Somers, I feel, is the bigger powerhouse for us to really look out for. Maybe a Zoro opponent for the arc, considering that he wields a sword. And what's also interesting is that if Shamrock is potentially about to be promoted to his father's position, then we will likely get to see who the next Gods Knight up is in the hierarchy, as they will be given Shamrock's current position. At least that's my guess. Now, what's interesting is, at the end of the chapter, the Gods Knights were discussing setting up some sort of a game in Elbaf. Now, this is very, very interesting because it could just be a game that, they play amongst themselves, kind of who can capture the most giant kids or something like that. That's a little competition amongst themselves for the next couple chapters, or it could be setting up a much more significant conflict for the arc as a whole. I have talked way in the past about how I believe that Elbaf is set up to be a Davy Backfight arc, and I talked about how the Straw Hats and the Red-Haired Pirates would likely come at odds there. I do still believe that Elbaf is likely set up to be not an all-out war necessarily by the end of it, but some sort of a competition wherein we won't see the Gods Knights as a whole just be defeated, but they will be bested in some way, because we do ultimately need to see the Gods Knights likely remain as threats heading into the final war. I have a much bigger video coming this Tuesday actually breaking down why we can actually very accurately predict what arcs the Straw Hats will and won't get a series of fights against an opposing force, but wait for that for the more in-depth explanation. But I would be very interested to see if this game that the Gods Knights are setting up essentially becomes the broader conflict of the arc, without it turning into a full-scale war where the Straw Hats actually need to defeat the majority of the Gods Knights in one-on-one combat. So let's stay tuned for that. And congratulations to Jensen Peters and Booty Pirate for correctly predicting Chapter 1140, and a huge congratulations to King J for being the first person to get 2 chapter predictions correct. And if you would like to compete to try and predict the next chapter, just tune in to next Break Week's Chapters Prediction Contest and get your prediction in. And beyond that, we have the Luffy and Zoro setup with Gabon at the beginning of the chapter. So I love how Oda handled this. He did not embarrass Gabon whatsoever. You don't want to make Gabon look bad when you're just introducing this character. You still don't want to make Luffy or Zoro look too bad, but Oda went out of his way to give more hype to Gabon, I think, overall in this interaction, without ever really making it feel like, oh my god, Luffy going all out can't take Gabon. Zoro going all out, we still don't know how he would stack up against Gabon at this moment in time. But at the very least, you would expect that Luffy, as a full-fledged Yonko at this point, should be able to take on like an 80-year-old Scopper Gabon, you know? But that doesn't mean that Gabon is a pushover. That's what I really wanted to see. Luffy could not take the key from Gabon easily, and once Gabon got serious, he did give Luffy and Zoro a clear shock as to how strong this old man actually turned out to be. I'm not going to get into the intricacies of the power scaling of this scenario. I just think that it treated Gabon well without embarrassing Luffy or Zoro too much, and that's really all I wanted to see. And this is also, by the way, what I love to see whenever Luffy and Zoro are together. They're just so in sync and on the same wavelength in battle. It's kind of like Luffy knows that Zoro shares the same brain as him once they're stepping onto the battlefield together, and that's my favorite aspect of the Luffy-Zoro dynamic. Now, there will be a lot of debate regarding whether or not Gabon has Advanced Conqueror's Haki or not. I think this is just yet another example among countless others of Oda not having done a good job establishing when the most important ability in the series is being used. My interpretation is that this moment does not establish that Scopper Gabon has Advanced Conqueror's Haki. He might have Advanced Conqueror's Haki, but this moment does not establish that. I've seen people talking about the streaks and whether there's Haki flowing off the weapon before or just after the attack, how big the brush strokes are. The reality is that every single argument you can find for one thing in particular proving Advanced Conqueror's Haki, you can find a counterexample for, right? You can find ulti in Luffy's headbutt, you can find the scabbards attacking Kaido, you can find a lot of different counterexamples to whatever reasoning you want to give. The problem is that the only real definitive indicator that Oda established in the story as to whether or not someone is using Advanced Conqueror's Haki is if the characters A, either specifically state that it's being used, or B, Oda goes out of his way to draw a huge, exaggerated visual of no contact. That's when we really know that it's being used, if there's a very exaggerated visual of no contact. The problem is that Oda doesn't always go out of his way to draw that in, even when characters are explicitly stated to be using Advanced Conqueror's Haki. So it's not that reliable. Really, I've seen all the examples that have been put forward regarding Haki, Advanced Conqueror's Haki, etc. There is so far no absolute indicator as to whether or not it's being used or not that is foolproof in the story. There is a counterexample to every single argument that readers want to bring up. So at the moment, I'm going to say that it is not established Scopper Gabon used Advanced Conqueror's Haki, but he could still have it and just not have used it right here. I think the simplest reason I would give as to why it's likely not Advanced Conqueror's Haki is because Advanced Conqueror's Haki is no joke. If he actually hit Luffy with Advanced Conqueror's Haki right there, I don't think Luffy would be popping up like it's just some minor bump that irritates him, and I do think Luffy would comment on the fact that, holy shit, this random geezer has Conqueror's Haki. But regardless of Conqueror's Haki or not, I think Gabon definitely impressed very much in this chapter, and I think one of the coolest things is just some of his random slashes just cut the whole tower in half, and you have to remember that this is a giant-sized castle, right? So essentially, if the giants are, 100 times bigger than humans, random guess right there, then proportionally, all of their architecture is like 100 times larger as well. So that tower that Gabon cut is essentially like 100 times bigger than a normal castle's tower, so just keep that in mind. It's a very, very, very big feat. It'd be kind of like, I feel like it's kind of like cutting something that's Pika-sized, almost, but just with wind slashes. And finally, we have a voice of the people, my top tier patrons. So Florian Vendari said, I understand Gaban's intentions now. He wants Luffy to claim the Stride as his own. Luffy still thinks he's just holding on to it for Shanks, but Luffy has to realize that this could be his crown, his very own symbol of being the Pirate King. That is a really, really interesting interpretation of that dialogue. I do think that there is a lot of merit there. Luffy needs to understand what his role is, and I think that that might be a little bit of a theme that's developing for the arc, that Luffy's kind of thrusting aside this sort of destiny that is clearly falling upon him. Like, towards the beginning of the arc, he's like, interesting, Nika, this stuff, well, that has nothing to do with me. And now the Stride, he's like, well, I'm just holding this for Shanks. It's like, no, there is a lot that's riding on you. The whole future of the world is actually riding on you. And this might be the time that Luffy actually has to come to terms with that, and we get to see Luffy's own reaction to all of this information about his own importance, as he normally rejects that sort of importance being foisted upon him. So I really, really enjoyed this week's chapter. I'm definitely looking forward to the next one, and with that, I will talk to you all next week.